9:39 exactly, news and views on the show this morning. We're now going to be talking with Professor Maphunye. He's from the Department of Political Sciences, College of Human Sciences, University of South Africa. And when I cast my mind back to the 27th of April 1994, I remember that I had stood for hours in queues which stretched over, gosh, a kilometer long to cast my vote in South Africa's first democratic election. And what did I feel at that particular time? I felt proud. I felt worthy. I felt truly South African. Professor, very good morning. Welcome to the program. Wonderful to have you here. And I've just shared what I felt like 30 years ago when I cast my vote for the first time ever in my life. And that's exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at we're going to reflect on the past 30 years and for the first time when people cast their vote. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. And what's going through your mind when I talk about the feelings that overwhelmed me when I was standing in that long, long queue to cast my vote, where I felt so, so important and so proudly South African?
Good morning to you and to your listeners. Thank you for inviting me. How appropriate and very, very nostalgic. It's beyond words, really, because as you can imagine, so many people having died, so many people having been imprisoned, tortured, disappeared even, just to have a right like the one that many will be having tomorrow to vote. 1994, 30 years ago, the 27th of April, was an election out of this world. Very, very different. They call it a founding election because obviously it buried, the past legacy of racial voting and racial, categorization of electoral participation and political participation, and ushered in a democratic dispensation. But how nostalgic. I agree with you absolutely. Some of us who were there when that day dawned, are really privileged to have been there, to have witnessed and participated in that event.
I hope young people can apply their minds. Those young people who are very apathetic about their rights as South African citizens, that they can apply their minds uh, as to just how important it is to exercise their rights as citizens of the country and to cast their votes. Because if each and every young person does that, we could have a, a really meaningful change in the country. Um, but having said that, going back to 1994, that was, you know, 20 million South Africans queued for over a 4 day, not 1 day, 4 day voting period. And just listen to this. I think this was phenomenal. With an 86.9% voter turnout, that was absolutely phenomenal. And I'm wondering, what is the voter turnout going to be like this time around?
Absolutely. We at the stage where someone could easily say we have arrived at the plateau, the highest, level peak of our democratic dispensation. Because if you look at the 86.9% voter turnout that you have just talked about, and then that it is hovering very close to the 50s, maybe just below over 50 in the past 2-3 national elections. This is just very worrisome. But the most important thing is that it is not the voter turnout really that wins an election. It is people's participation and intention, willingness even, to wake up in the morning, to go and stand in the queue and cast their votes. Because at the end of the day, even if that voter turnout is whether it is at the highest level ever, 80% and over, or it's at its lowest, at the end of the day, it is the symbolic importance of casting that ballot, knowing that you are doing something to rebuild this country just with only one vote. Just 2-3 days ago, I was speaking to one of the election observer, leaders who were saying to me, "Do you know that an election can be lost with only one or two or three or a few votes, and it can also be won by a similar number of votes? So just one more vote counts a lot, and it can actually make a very, very huge difference in terms of the legitimacy of the outcome of an election."
We also understand that Nelson Mandela obviously voted for the first time in Inanda in KwaZulu-Natal, near the grave of John Dube, the founding president of the ANC. That was a momentous time for us as South Africans, and that was an action that goes down in our history books, does it not?
It was a historic moment, and that historic moment actually was one of the building blocks that brought us to where we are today, and reminded us that actually, because some of the people, whether it is John Langalibalele Dube, all the other former leaders such as Albert Lutuli, Robert Mugabe, Sobukwe, Steve Biko, you name it, the critics and Kenyans of this world who were killed with a bomb just to be not far away from the eve of the democratic dispensation. All these people, they are dead, and their suffering and the sacrifices were not in vain, because this is why Nelson Mandela made that symbolic mission to go there and cast a vote, as if to tell this fallen hero leader to say, look, you were crying, fighting even for this right, just the right to be able to cast your vote and to vote for a party of your choice, a person, a leader of your choice, a candidate of your choice, and to be able to participate in the running of a country. That was denied to you by apartheid and previous dispensations, racial segregation, dispensations before 1948 and so on, slavery even. But here we are today, your great-great-grandchildren, myself, Nelson Mandela, and the others all over the country. We are casting the vote, and we managed to achieve what you were fighting for and crying for. So it was very symbolic.
So, Professor, what do you remember about the 1994 elections? Where were you at the time, and what were the type of feelings that you were experiencing? Undoubtedly, one of those would have been very hopeful, but where were you, and what was going on in your head?
I was in Botswana at the time, being one of the South African refugees, because I was one of the former Soweto students who fought against apartheid in Soweto, with the likes of T.S. Machinini and the other stalwarts that I never talked about. We have forgotten about those. And at that time, I remember we were feverishly trying to get South African documents, because at that time we had been, regarded as aliens, people who are not worthy of the citizenship of this country, and feverishly trying to contact the South African mission to find, voting papers and all those things. And at that moment, or on that day, what was going through my mind, I were actually, mixed emotions. On the one hand, there were tears of joy, happiness, and jubilation even, euphoria, you can name it. I've never experienced that feeling ever since 1994 till to date. I know some South Africans experienced that such emotions or something close to that emotion during the FIFA Soccer World Cup of 2010. For me, that's minimal. The feeling I felt around the 27th of April 1994 was overwhelming. But on the other hand, I was also very, very sad, crying even, that some of my fellow, former colleagues, comrades, you name it, friends, schoolmates, had been mowed down, had been killed, in Soweto, 1976 and subsequent years. And some of them were still in prison, by the way. We should also remember that when 1994 dawned, some people were still in prison, and of course, the apartheid regime had been releasing political prisoners piecemeal. Many of them had been released just after 1990 February, along Nelson Mandela. But some remained, especially those of the Pan-Africanist, Black consciousness, political inclination. So it was only after many, many years of lobbying, shortly thereafter, after 1994, that they also enjoyed, the fruit of their struggles and their labor. But 1994, 27th April was a very, very historic and nostalgic moment. Nostalgia, obviously, for freedom, for whatever term you could use, whether you call it liberation, whether you call it freedom, participatory democracy, representative democracy, the right to have a constitution and to have a citizenship of a country that you can call yours. All these clauses that are in the Bill of Rights, we did not have those, and we were actually crying for them, yearning for them. And 1994 was telling us that all these are now going to be possible.
So, Professor, did you were outside of the country trying desperately to get the necessary paperwork to allow you to cast your vote? Were you successful, you and your other comrades?
Eventually, yes. Eventually, after much struggle and so on, we succeeded. As you can imagine, much of the action was happening inside the country. There was even uncertainty inside the country that the election might not take place, or there would be violence. One of the parties, the Inkatha Freedom Party, obviously was not so sure whether to participate. It threatened to boycott the election. They were also right-wing, white political, mostly white political formations. The OSEVA, AWP, and all these. We have forgotten all these. They were threatening, to take action and to scupper these elections, to frustrate them. But in the end, to answer your question, we did manage to find those documents, and of course to be able to exercise our democratic rights. After much struggle, after many years, after tears and blood, sweat, and tears, I should say. But inside the country, where the action was happening, people were actually on tenterhooks, some actually waiting patiently for this moment to arrive, others not sure whether it would arrive because of the threats of violence and so on and so on. And of course, in the end, the political leaders came to the table. Inkatha Freedom Party was also persuaded to participate. And in the end, that ballot paper, if you can look at it from 1994, many of the voters who will be going to vote tomorrow, they might just be reminded that it was almost an add-on thing, like the addition of these independents. We've got 11 independents participating in this election among the many parties that are participating. They were added right almost at the tail end of before the election could commence. And hence, in that ballot paper, you will see that the Inkatha Freedom Party is right at the bottom in the list of the 1994 ballot paper.
And can you just describe, when you put your X down on the ballot paper, what went through your mind and how were you feeling?
I was breathless, breathless, sad, even, like I said, mixed, roller coaster, mixed emotions, really. Not knowing that, is this really me? I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to continue forever and ever until some of us are not on this earth. But here am I. You kept on pinching yourself to say, but it's me. It's me. And now I'm casting a vote, for a new democracy. Yeah. It was emotional, I'm telling you. It was emotional.
Thank you, God, for your blessings so that we can see another momentous and another election, which a lot of people are touting as a very, very important election year, given that we've enjoyed 30 years of democracy, but the country is not where we want it to be due to corruption, and a whole host of issues that we are all very well aware of. My final question then to you, Professor, is back then, 30 years ago, the ANC won 63% of the vote, the National Party 20%, and the IFP 11%. We know that the DA is just a new name for possibly, and I stand corrected, the National Party. How do you think we're going to look at these three parties in particular? How are they going to fare? Let's not forget the EFP as well. How do you think those figures are going to look post the elections this year's elections, 2024?
This year, yes. Just to for the listeners' benefit, the current DA around 2,000 thereabouts. It merged, and then it was actually it developed out of the merger of the Democratic Party, the old Democratic Party, which was one of the liberal parties that were there, during the apartheid era, and the National Party, of course. Just after the National Party decided that it's going to be NNP, New National Party, just to modify it, because many people were actually saying this National Party is a racial party. It's a party of white people. So it was hemorrhaging support, losing many members and so on. And I think that's why eventually, in spite of the NNP attempt or the attempt to metamorphose or to change into New National Party, eventually they felt, look, let's just merge with the Democratic Party, and hence we had the Democratic Alliance. But it should be mentioned, to be fair to the DA, the current DA of 2024, that it is very different from the party that merged in the Democratic Party and then the NNP or the NP, the National Party of that time, because the DA over the years obviously has been evolving into a Democratic Party that obviously largely reflects the wider demographic profile or picture of South Africa, which is what we see today. And all its policies have changed, its outlook, its ideology, much of it has changed, even though, of course, its critics continue saying it's a white party, but I don't believe it's a white party because it's diverse, And now, to answer your question, between the African National Congress, the DA, obviously, as we talk about it, and of course, you mustn't forget the EFF, the top three. And I'm glad that you are mentioning these three, because some people forget that from 2019 up to today, 2024, the ANC, the DA, as well as the EFF remain the top three parties of South Africa. Of course, you have to add the others, that are parties that are represented in parliament, including the IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party, the UDM, and so on. And add all the other parties, ACDP, African Christian Democratic Party. They are still there in parliament, and they are still there up until tomorrow's election, because they are members of parliament. After that, we could see a different picture altogether. Why am I saying that? Because we now have between May 2019, when that last election was held 5 years ago, and this May 2024, so much political water has passed under the bridge. So much has happened. We now have a very diverse political landscape in the formation of different, a number of emerging new political parties, such as the PA, Patriotic Alliance, the Action SA, and so on and so, which many of which were not there in 2019, and even in 1994. So to that extent, the competition and the contention and the contest is going to be very, very intense. And in the end, of course, we expect that there will be a winner. The big parties, ANC, DA, and EFF, could still continue to dominate because, South Africa over the years has shown that it is a one-party dominant type of political system whereby if you have a dominant party, it tends to, its dominance it tends to persist over the years. But of course, we know that South Africans are increasingly becoming sophisticated, voters. They are now beginning to question what these political parties stand for and so on. And with the addition of the 11 independents, we are definitely in for a very, very interesting contest. In the end, they could still continue to do well, the three parties that we're talking about, but we mustn't forget the rising parties such as, Rise and Ganti and Arise South Africa and the others. And there are so many, Bosa of Musi, Maimani and so on and so on. The competition is intense. But I think the founders of the 1996 Constitution of South Africa, which, by the way, used to be called the final constitution. And that is not final. It's going to keep changing, being modified.
Right.
So that's so-called final constitution. In that final constitution, the clause was put in there to say South Africa must have a multi-party democracy. When you have a domination of three parties, that for me is not multi-party. But as soon as you have an addition of more parties, like 57, 51, 31, like the ones that we are having currently, for me, it shows that it looks like we are actually following truly on that constitutional provision that says that we need to have a multi-party democracy. By the way, they never stated how multiple are supposed to be multi-party. They just give, the minimum that you can't have one party being there. You need to have more. I suppose they were trying to move away from that, pre-1994 scenario whereby the National Party was dominating the stakes, all for many years, for many decades, being the party that is actually, governing almost like an autocratic, party, because it wasn't challenged that much, and of course it was oppressing, if one can put it bluntly, the views of the majority of the citizens of South Africa, which are the black South Africans. They didn't have a right to vote for this national party, which was now governing over them. So the founders of that constitution cleverly put in this new clause to say it must be a multi-party democracy that is based on proportional representation. If South Africans want to change it, surely tomorrow is the time, because I know there are some parties which say that they want to change this electoral act, they want the electoral system, they want to change the constitution. So be it. Let it be the views of South Africans, of the voter, and not the views of one individual sitting somewhere in the corner, like a military, despot, and taking positions on behalf of the majority who challenge them.
Professor Maphunye, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Don't forget, you must go out tomorrow to cast your vote. Professor, you
Actually,
are...
I've already done that. I've cast my special vote yesterday because
I did too.
On duty tomorrow, with the media.
Okay.
I'm going to do doing media comments. Right. So I won't have time to go to the polling station in the morning. So I applied for a special vote, and let me manage to exercise my rights as I'm speaking.
And I did too. So I've also feel very proud about that. And I'm just urging other people to please go out and exercise your rights to vote, because it really confirms your stake in the future of this country. Thank you, Professor. All the best. God bless. Wonderful talking with you.
God bless you too. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
It is exactly 2 after 10 o'clock. Our next guest is standing by, but let me just remind you that this past hour of news and views was sponsored by Africa Muslims Agency. Africa Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for over 35 years in Africa and beyond.